Scripture reading is going to be from Matthew chapter 13, verses 31 through 33, 44 to 52. He put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that someone took and sowed in the field. It is the smallest of all the seeds, but when it has grown, it is the greatest of shrubs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and make nest in its branches. He told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed in with 3 measures of flour until all of it was leavened. The kingdom of God is like a treasure hidden in a field, which someone found and hid. Then in his joy he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls. On finding one pearl of great value, he went and sold all that he had and bought it. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was thrown into the sea and caught fish of every kind. When it was full, they drew it ashore, sat down, and put the good into baskets, but they threw out the bad. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come and separate the evil from the righteous and throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Have you understood all this? They answered, yes. And he said to them, therefore every scribe who has been trained for the kingdom of heaven is like the master of a household, who brings out his treasure, what is new and what is old.
The kingdom of God is like. We learned in seminary, and ever since then, that parables are stories that are intended to convey one point. You can't get lost in the details of a parable. Just find the point of the parable. Now, I asked you a very, very difficult question and wanted you to respond to that. I understand that it was a very, very difficult question because more times than not, when I get done preaching a sermon and I stand out at the door and I greet people as they go out, I hear someone say, "Pastor, I'm glad you said this in your sermon." And I'm going, I did? Now, when in the world did I say that? But that's what they heard. Last week we talked about parables. And when each one of us listens to a parable, there is the possibility that we hear different things. What I'm doing last week and this week, and to tell you the truth, the rest of the time while I'm here with you, is to simply share with you what I hear. And I assume that if I needed to hear it, you need to hear it also. And so last week, well, there's a great joke about a preacher who got up and began to preach to the congregation and wanted to assure the congregation one thing, and started this way. Said, in lieu of last week's sermon, which had 83 points, have you heard this one? Yeah. This week's sermon will be pointless. What in the world did I think I said to you last week, as opposed to what you heard? What I thought I said to you last week is actually the first part of the sermon this week. Because we're going to take these parables actually in reverse order. And the last parable that Jesus shares is that parable about the net being cast into the lake and gathering every single kind of fish. And then all those fish are brought up to the shore. And then what happens after all those fish are brought up to the shore? At the end time, then at that time, the angels will separate the good from the bad. It is not the fish's point or purpose or mission to separate the good from the bad. The angels will do that at the end of time. It is simply the fish's job to be a fish. And last week, I tried to say to you that it's not the wheat's job to separate the wheat from the weeds. That'll happen later. It is not our job to judge what we think about that person sitting next to us in the pew and their life and their actions. That is God's. We simply do the best that we can. And that's what I got out of it. But anyway, what you got out of it, if you got something else out of it, I would love to talk to you about that. So, because I enjoy listening to other things, to other points, to other views, and having fantastic discussions about those. We move back up with these parables, and we find these sort of this parable about that pearl of great price. Someone found a pearl in a field, sold everything that they had, and bought that field so that they could have that treasure that was in that field. Remember, Jesus is saying the kingdom of God is like that treasure hidden in that field. And for me, I ask the question, okay, what am I willing to give? What am I willing to sell? What am I willing to give up for that pearl, to obtain that pearl in my life? Now, we're not talking about a monetary physical thing. We're talking about something that's abstract. And so in some ways, when I talk about the things that I need to give up, the things that I'm going to get rid of in order to obtain this treasure, sometimes it's physical things, sometimes it isn't. Mostly in my life, what I have discovered is that one of the things I need to get rid of, to sell in order to obtain this pearl of great price, is my desire or my need to be right. Even though I know I am all the time. I know that it is actually more important to be in a relationship than in some ways to be right and or to follow certain rules and regulations. I have seen time and time again families that are torn apart because of someone's need to be right instead of living in relationship with someone. A few years ago, we went to a wedding, and the parents of one of the persons in the wedding decided not to come because they disagreed with the context of this wedding. It didn't matter That was one. Or I've also heard of other parents, and I've had other weddings where there are parents who, for one reason or another, or a brother or a sister who decides not to show up for a wedding. Because, they've got their rules. They've got their regulations. They don't think God thinks that would be right. And so they sacrifice a relationship in order to follow what? I think in the kingdom of God, there's this little word called love. And love is much more important than laws. Relationships are much more important than rules and regulations. Here in a couple of weeks, I'm going to go to Denver, Colorado. I'm going to be in my last week of taking a 2-year class in pastoral effectiveness. I figured, here after 36 years or so of ministry, I should learn how to do it. How in the world can I be more effective? So, one of the key points that our instructor is continually talking to us about is that if we break relationship, then we can't help fix a situation or a problem. If we get out of an institution, then we can't help fix an institution. Staying in relationship is the only way we can affect and help make changes in either that person or in that institution. Those relationships are vitally important. Now, one thing that I need to let you know is that since that wedding, the parents have tried and are accomplishing to heal the relationship with their child. But Lynn and I, we are viewed by the parents now as the problem. And is that relationship, or are their rules and their regulations more important than this long-term friendship that we've had? They obviously think it is. That pearl of great price. At what cost? There's another story. And forgive, I love this story. About 15, 20 years into my ministry, there was a gentleman who was retiring from his first career. He had always felt called into the ministry, but he didn't go because his wife told him that if he did go into the ministry, she would divorce him. So he stayed in his regular job until he retired. Now, once he retired, he was getting his pension from the first job he did. He figured, okay, what the heck? God is really calling me into ministry. And so he talked to his wife again and said, okay, I'm retired. I want to go into the ministry. And she simply said, if you go into the ministry, I'm going to divorce you. There's no way on God's green earth that I want to be a minister's spouse. And he had a decision to make. At what cost was he going to go into the ministry? And he chose the ministry. And his wife divorced him. The fun thing about this is, he was probably 68 years old. And he's just going into the ministry at 68. And I said, do you realize, his goal was to be ordained in the United Methodist Church. And I said, do you realize that it takes 4 or 5 years to go through the ordination process? And by the time you retire, you're going to be 72 or 73. And in the United Methodist Church, we have mandatory retirement at 72. You have to retire. And he said, yes, I know. The most joyous annual conference I ever attended was that annual conference, when this person was on the first day ordained an elder in the United Methodist Church, and on the last day was retired. It was wonderful. But at what cost? Part of the difficulty with this text is that too many times we can think that this pearl of great price, the kingdom of God, is something that we can purchase and we can possess. But if we think that, we're wrong. It's actually something we purchase, but then something that possesses us and changes us. So that, like the song said, that when I'm in the world through me may see God, may hear God, may know God. And then the last parable, the one about the mustard seed and the yeast. That little thing which can be done in the world, which can change everything. One of the saddest comments I ever hear from members in my church and friends and elsewhere is people say to me, I don't accomplish anything in the world. I don't do great things like I do. And I'm going, you don't know my life very well, do you? They say, after all, you're a preacher. You get up there and you preach every Sunday to all these people, and that is great and wonderful and marvelous things. And I look at them and I go, no, it isn't. What is the greatest thing in the kingdom of God? Love. How does 1 Corinthians 13 go? If I speak in the tongues of men and angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong and a clanging cymbal. If I have prophetic powers and all understanding of all mysteries, and if I know everything, if I'm the smartest person in the world, but if I do, and I have all faith, and if I can remove mountains, if I can heal people, if I can do all that other stuff, but if I have not love, I can't do anything. If I give away all I have, and if I deliver my body to be burned, but if I have not love, I gain nothing. All the sermons preached by all the preachers in all the world amount to nothing compared to one single act of love from one person to another. Acts of kindness, acts of reconciliation. Those are the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And those are the things that we are to be about. Those simple acts of kindness that you do every day are the powerful acts of the kingdom that God rejoices in heaven. We are not to judge. We are to get our priorities straight. What is more important? And we are to do those small, kind, loving acts to be God's people. So next week, if I ask you, what in the world was the sermon about this week? I'll give you this. Why don't you do this? Next week, that won't be my question to you. That can be your question to me. Because more times than not, this afternoon, I will forget what today's sermon was about. But I hope you don't. Amen.